Hi everyone, and welcome to week 3 of Crossroads Children's Mental Health Center's 3-part webinar series focused on children's mental health and COVID-19. My name is Julie Giacchino. I'm a registered psychotherapist and manager at Crossroads. Myself and my coworker Isabel McNider, registered social worker and supervisor at Crossroads, will walk you through today's webinar. In times of stress and uncertainty, it's normal for people that are otherwise healthy to experience impacts on their mental health and their well-being. At Crossroads, we strongly believe that addressing mental health needs must be a central part of the response to this pandemic. The pandemic is slow-moving, and currently it's not clear when it will end, making it even more challenging for families. Mental health must be part of the conversation now more than ever. Here's a little bit of information about us before we start. Crossroads Children's Mental Health Center works exclusively with children under the age of 12 and their loved ones. We're committed to delivering a wide range of mental health services to help children and families struggling with severe emotional, behavioral, and social challenges. Our services are individualized, families are included as full participants, and there is no charge to access our programs. Here's a list of some of the services we offer. The one I want to highlight right now is our walk-in clinic. We offer a free weekly walk-in clinic on Wednesdays and Thursdays to families that have children under the age of 12. All of the information on all of our programs and how to access our walk-in can be found on our website at www.crossroadschildren.ca. And I'll also provide more information on how you can reach us at the end of today's presentation. As we head back to school, we find ourselves in uncharted territory. There's a lot of pressure right now on families, and it can feel like every day new information or new guidance is being provided. So much unknown is certainly anxiety-producing for everyone. Experts and service providers are already starting to see increasing demands for mental health services as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. In response to the anticipated surge of mental health needs of children and families, and in preparation for Back to School 2020, Crossroads Children's Mental Health Center has created this 3-part webinar series. Today, our focus will be on mental health, mental illness, and when to get help. Through this brief webinar series, we hope to provide you with some key concepts that will help you and your family navigate these uncertain times. But most of all, our goal is to provide you with some practical strategies to help your children thrive. Mental health, mental illness, and when to get help. Here's an overview of today's webinar. We'll start off with a calming activity to get us all ready to learn. Then we'll talk about the mental health continuum, followed by anxiety and depression in children, and we'll end off today's webinar with providing you with practical strategies for home. If you've watched our first 2 webinars, you already know how important we think it is for you as the caregiver to feel well and calm in order to support your child to thrive. So with that in mind, let's start off with a 2-minute breathing activity. This mindfulness activity will help you to focus on the present and sets the stage for learning. Simply take deep, mindful breaths as you listen to and watch the waves come to shore. Allow yourself to be in this one moment. Taking the time, in this case only 2 minutes, to calm a racing mind helps to set you up for success as a learner in this situation and as a caregiver at home. Due to the pandemic, we've all experienced an increase in stress. Everyone has had to develop strategies to maintain optimal mental health. A common question we get from parents is, when should I be concerned? How can I tell the difference between normal stress and mental illness? Today's presentation will help you to determine whether there might be a cause for concern and when you might need professional support. As you can see from the slide, mental health is a continuum. It's not an absence or presence of mental illness. We move along the mental health continuum and along the mental illness continuum. Individuals with mental illness can live rich, productive lives, just like individuals without mental illness can be struggling to make it through the day. Today, we'll explore some common areas of concern for children and what parents can pay attention to. This will help you determine when you need to consult and what you can do to help. Note that I didn't say or, it's both. Your child will need your help to support them, and you may need professional guidance to determine what is most helpful. We'll also review some of the other common concerns that we see at Crossroads. When children have a physical illness or injury, caregivers will get professional help, the professional help that they need. When children have symptoms of mental illness, they need their caregivers to respond in the exact same way. What is childhood mental health and what does it look like? Mental health is a resource for living. It allows us to learn, work, play, and find enjoyment in life. It helps us through those tough times. From a child's point of view, mental health means I feel like I have things to live for. I feel that people care about me. I feel hopeful and good about the future. I like myself. Mental illnesses are characterized by alterations in thinking, mood, or behavior associated with significant distress and impaired functioning. So what does this mean for children? As you know, children are naturally moody, can have irrational thinking and challenging behaviors. So when looking at the information presented, think of your child. What's normal for them? Is your child generally high stress and reactive, and they've always been that way? Is your child shy and introverted, and just generally prefers quiet activities by themselves? Think of this as your baseline for what's typical for your child. It's not helpful to compare them to other children, as children vary quite a bit. When looking at mental illness, we're looking at significant distress and impaired functioning over an extended period. This is not about having an off day or having a strong response to an event. Everyone has those moments. They're usually a shorter-term reaction to a difficult challenge. At the beginning of the pandemic, many of us may have been feeling that way. But by now, most of us are starting to cope with the challenge, and we're actively trying to recreate a sense of normalcy. If you're still struggling with coping, please watch our first 2 webinars. If your child is still having a huge response to the pandemic, and it doesn't show any signs of lessening, you may need professional help, and today's webinar will help you to make that determination. 1 in 5 Canadians will experience mental illness in any given year, and 70% of those have onset in childhood. This doesn't mean that someone who experiences mental illness in childhood will have severe mental illness throughout their lives. With help, mental illness can move from severe to mild to in recovery, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Canadians in lower income groups are more likely to experience mental illness. Socioeconomic factors have an impact on experiences of mental health. We know that stress is a contributing factor for mental illness. So if you are experiencing pandemic stress, such as being worried about how school is going to go this term, and you're also worried about losing your job, then you're at greater risk of developing a mental illness. Although this is a serious issue, we know a lot about mental illness and what can help. The next video is from annafreud.org, a UK-based nonprofit that has put together some mental health resources around children's mental health. The Schools in Mind section has materials for teachers and also allied professionals, but many of these would be really helpful to parents as well. These are free and downloadable. They have some great videos around mental health. The following video could be used as a conversation starter when exploring the topic of mental health with older children.
You can't tell how someone feels just by looking at them or what they share online. To the outside world, our lives may look perfect, even if in reality they aren't. I'm always worrying about doing well at school, and with the end of year test coming up, I'm not sure how much longer I can cope. My thoughts swarm around my head, sometimes keeping me up all night. Some days it's just all too much, and I feel like I'm lost in space. When I did badly on one of my tests, I just about kept it together until I got home. Then I broke down crying in front of my mum. She listened for a bit, and then she told me that, just like physical health, we all have mental health. It's our feelings, our thinking, our emotions, and our moods. She then said that feeling down, angry, and stressed is a normal part of life, just like it's normal to feel happy, confident, and carefree sometimes. We all have positive and negative emotions that come and go based on what's happening around us. These are everyday feelings. Good mental health means experiencing negative emotions. It's not always about being happy. Mum can relate to the feelings of stress. So when Mum suggested I take a break from everything and do something I enjoy, I actually took her advice. So I made myself a hot chocolate, snuggled up in a duvet and watched a film. And you know what? Afterwards I felt so much better. Mum should take her own advice.
Most of us only ever share the good things. We don't like to share how we really feel. Every morning when I wake up, negative thoughts stream through my head. Getting out of bed and pretending I'm okay takes all the energy I have. As the day goes on, the negative thoughts turn from a stream into a river. The water rushes through my head so loudly it's hard to concentrate in lessons. And some days it's so bad it feels like a waterfall that's trying to pull me over the edge. Everything is so overwhelming. I didn't think my friends would understand if I told them how down I was feeling. But when Sasha opened up to me about how stressed she was feeling, I told her. I wasn't sure how to bring up how I'd been feeling, so I started by saying that I didn't feel like myself. Just her listening made me feel like she understood. She told me some things that had helped her, so I tried them too, but it didn't make much of a difference. Even when I tried to be around my friends, I felt alone. The things I used to enjoy weren't fun anymore.
I was really worried about Andre and not sure what to do. He was quiet and wasn't hanging out with us like he used to. So I asked our head of year for some advice. He suggested I get Andre to speak to him since his negative feelings weren't going away.
I didn't want to speak to our head of year, but I also didn't want to keep feeling so down, so I went. He said that sometimes we have overwhelming feelings that can be more intense than our everyday feelings. These feelings hang around for a long time and change the way we feel, think, and behave. They can stop us doing what we want to in life. That's what I was going through. He also said that if we're physically unwell, we let people know, we ask for help. It should be no different with mental health. Sometimes our overwhelming feelings are brought on because of things in our life. Sometimes they happen for no reason at all. After hearing this, I felt much less alone and it felt good to talk. Scientists have found exercise can help when you're feeling low, so our head of year encouraged me to sign up to the school football club, which Sasha was already in. I still have days when the river is there, but now I'm beginning to understand my mental health. I'm learning how to cope. Our head of year reminded me that my friends, family, teachers, and lots of others at school are there to help just as much as he is. I had no idea the people around me could be so understanding. And while it's not always easy to talk about my mental health, The person I'm talking to might be able to help. If you don't feel like talking, that's fine. You could try writing, sports, reading, art, music, playing with your pet, whatever makes you feel better.
If you're the person someone talks to when they're struggling, just listen with no pressure or judgments. You don't have to have the answer. If you feel unsure about anything, you can speak to a trusted adult. Talking about mental health doesn't have to be difficult. After all, it's something we all have.
As you can see, there's a lot of hope for mental illness. So notice our logo, Help for Children, Hope for Families. We're here to help you walk through this. As mental health counselors, we can't diagnose mental illness. The purpose today is to help guide your decision to seek further support from someone who can. However, as mental health counselors, we play an important role in the recovery process. Professionals who can diagnose mental illness are doctors, psychologists, or psychiatrists, and they will look at a variety of factors. Some of the variables presented today will help you to determine if you should consult with a professional. Keep in mind that you know your child best. If you have a sense that your child is just not their usual self, that feeling is worth investigating. Parents will often say that their child is perhaps just not themselves right now, and sometimes it's actually more of a gut feeling, but it's worth paying attention to. There are some relatively simple ways to distinguish between normal and problematic changes in mood. The variables listed on this slide can help distinguish between the two, and we'll touch on each of them. The good news is you don't need a diagnosis to access mental health services. At Crossroads, we target our interventions based on the specific concerns of the family and child, and we don't need a diagnosis to do that. Is your child's worry keeping them up at night? Is your child suddenly hesitant to do things that they would normally do? We can help with that. We all experience different moods throughout the day and throughout our lives. For the next few slides, think about mental health in terms of mood. What is your child's baseline, and what are you seeing right now? The first characteristic to consider is frequency. Thinking about your child's moods, thoughts, behaviors, how frequently do they change? Multiple, frequent mood change can be a cause for concern. Is your child going from sad to angry to withdrawn? Then we can look at the duration of the mood. If a shift in mood is short, like 2 days, there's generally no cause for concern, especially if there's a good reason, like getting a bad grade on a test. However, if the mood shift is 2 weeks or more, and there are other indicators, then you may want to consider seeking professional help. One thing you can ask yourself is whether this response that you're seeing from the child is a bigger response than you would expect under the circumstances. For example, your child may be saddened over missing a planned birthday party, and a month later, they're still crying about it. Maybe your friend's kids have gradually resumed some everyday activities, but your child is still worried about germs and contamination, despite reassurances of safety. Pervasiveness. If a mood change occurs only in one setting, then it's most likely stress-related to that very specific setting. For example, a child being nervous when on vacation but typically having no issues when back home. Or a child who has one friendship where there's lots of conflict, but generally does well socially. Sometimes we hear from parents that children are doing very well at home, but they're struggling at school. School can be very stressful for children. And there are some factors that might contribute to children having issues at school, including not having the capacity to meet the expectations presented to them. If you haven't done so already, it can be helpful to start the conversation with your school team to get a sense of what's getting in the way at school. Teachers are well positioned to notice mood shifts in your children. Starting that dialogue can give you valuable information into how your child is doing overall. On the flip side, if you're seeing many mood changes across multiple aspects of your child's life, there may be a need to consult. Intensity. How intense are your child's moods? If your child feels sad when something goes wrong, that's common. If your child is having an intense response like a fit of rage from being told they can't go to a play date, that might be worth exploring. Parents will sometimes say that their child will go from 0 to 100 in a very short time. Again, some children are naturally more reactive than others. However, if the intensity of the response seems out of proportion to the event, it might be worth noting. How is your child feeling their emotion? Do they seem in distress? Younger children will often have a big reaction when they're hungry, tired, or stressed, but then they are able to recover quickly with a nap or a snack. And finally, impact on daily life. When thinking of your child's mood, what impact is their mood having on sleep, appetite, concentration? Are your child's moods stopping them from fully participating in their lives? Is it impacting their ability to participate in family outings, go to school, or do basic things like showering or brushing their teeth? This is where the continuum comes in again. Some children may experience low mood but be able to function in their daily life. They are at a different place on the continuum from someone who can no longer fully participate in their lives.
I'm a supervisor at Crossroads, and I'll be covering the rest of the slides for today. So you looked at all the indicators and you think there's enough there to explore further. What now? Keep in mind that a doctor will look at the whole picture. They will look at the indicators as a group. If you can speak to some of these indicators, that will be very helpful information for your doctor. Remember that you are the expert when it comes to your child. These indicators will help support your concerns. The best place to start is your family doctor. They can see if any referral need to be made. Sometimes a doctor can diagnose, and sometimes they will refer to a mental health specialist for more extensive assessments. We discussed PLEO in Webinar 1, Parents Lifeline of Eastern Ontario. They are available to help parents navigate the mental health sector. It can be tricky to know where to go for different services. PLEO can help with that. You can go to pleo.on.ca for more information. So why do we say recovery? Why not cure? The focus of treatment is to shift your child along the continuum to mental health as opposed to mental illness. People with mental illness can shift along the continuum throughout their lives. In times of stress, mental illness may resurface, but when that happens, you'll already know what helps with recovery. People with mental illness can live full and rewarding lives. If you are depressed, you are living in the past. If you are anxious, you are living in the future. If you are at peace, you are living in the present. This quote isn't meant to minimize mental illness by saying, hey, just be in the present moment. That's what we call toxic positivity. Anxiety and depression are real illnesses, just like diabetes or hypertension. The quote is simply stating that people can experience future-oriented or past-oriented stress. What I mean by this quote is that anxiety and depression are two manifestations related to the child not coping well. Just like some children may have more externalized manifestations of stress like anger, some children may have more internalized manifestations of stress like withdrawal. The point is, both are there to teach you that your child is not okay and he needs some help. Anxiety and depression are two of the most reasons for children accessing mental health treatment centers. So we will give a brief overview of what they can look like. 25% of people will experience an anxiety disorder in their lifetime. It's the most common mental health problem in Canada. It's also a regular part of our everyday language. We often make jokes like, oh, I'm a little OCD when talking about our cleaning habits. As we mentioned earlier, the pandemic may have brought forward new worries. When talking to friends, you may have noticed a lot of reactions such as isolation, loneliness, and emotional distress. Some people may have shifted from well to unwell. Some anxiety is common and adaptive to help us deal with threats in our environment, like a pandemic, for example. However, when thinking about the markers that we presented, frequency, duration, intensity, pervasiveness, impact on daily life, does the worry fall within the mental illness range of the continuum? Let's review some aspects of anxiety disorders. If you missed our last webinar, we discussed how the brain can respond to stress. In this video, we see example of how stress impacts the anxious brain. When children understand their reactions, we can teach them how to respond in a way that makes them feel capable of facing their worries rather than avoiding them. Here's a great video from anxietycanada.com. I highly recommend their website. There are a lot of free tools for parents, children, and youth.
You know that scared or nervous feeling you get when you have to do something you're not sure you can do? Or go somewhere you've never been before? That feeling is called anxiety. And it can feel a bit different for each person, but it usually doesn't feel very nice. Maybe your palms get sweaty, or your body tenses up, or maybe you get a tummy ache. Maybe you've heard of anxiety, or maybe you haven't, but you've definitely felt it before. Because everyone feels it sometimes. It's normal. You want to know something really weird about anxiety? It's actually trying to help you. It's true. All those uncomfortable feelings, those happen because your brain thinks you're in danger, and it wants to protect you. When our muscles tense up and we sweat, it gets us ready to do a lot of exercise, which is helpful if you need to jump out of the way of a runaway train or wrestle a wolverine. Sometimes our minds go blank and we feel like we can't move or talk. That would be great if we needed to hide. Instead, we just feel stuck. When your brain does this, it's called fight, flight, or freeze. The problem is, sometimes your brain gets confused and it can't tell the difference between a charging moose and, say, going to a new school. Both things can be scary and cause anxiety. But there aren't any dangerous wild animals at a new school. Hopefully. Understanding where anxiety comes from is the first step in learning to deal with it. So the next time you're in one of those tough situations and you start to feel those feelings, like butterflies in your stomach or sweaty palms, or it gets hard to talk or move, remember, there's nothing wrong with your body. You're just having normal feelings of anxiety, and they're actually trying to help, even if they're not very good at it sometimes.
There are many forms of anxiety disorder, but as this is a general overview, we will not look at specifics such as panic disorders, generalized anxiety disorders, or phobias. We will look at general symptoms of anxiety, and your doctor will determine if a deeper dive is warranted. So we're going to look at affect, cognition, dependence, excess and extreme, and functioning. Every child is different. Your child may have some of these symptoms, but not all of them. It can be helpful to think about your fear response. Imagine you're in the forest and a bear pops up behind a tree. You would have a lot of these symptoms. These are normal responses to fear. For children with anxiety, they're having a fear response when the trigger is not life-threatening, but their body is responding as if it is. One way to understand this is fear is when the threat will be happening soon, whereas anxiety is when children can't predict when the threat will happen. One thing that's important to understand is that those feelings are very real for the child. Though it's tempting to say, there's nothing to worry about, the reality is that the worry is there. So instead of trying to convince your child not to worry, which is a perfectly understandable parenting response, we change the focus to what you can do with that worry. The goal of supporting your children is to bring them to a place where they feel like they can face their worries. If you haven't had a chance to watch webinar 2, you will find it helpful to understand what might be happening in your child's brain. Often, what is manifested are certain behaviors, but the behaviors are a manifestation of the concern. What I invite you to consider is what might be going on inside your child's mind that would lead to this behavior. One of the most common behaviors that we see related to anxiety is avoidance. As you can see from the list, the child's main solution to fear and worry might be to avoid the source of those feelings. Although this is temporarily helpful, this magnifies the internal message of, I can't cope with this, it's too scary. Keep in mind that for some children with anxiety, the absence of school as an expectation may have actually lowered their stress quite a bit. They might have done very well at home without the trigger of school. We can anticipate that returning to school will be challenging for these kids. This is predictable as they are no longer used to tolerating the stress trigger. For some children, you might see the opposite end of the fight, flight, freeze response. You might see fight. It might show up as irritability or even aggression. Thinking about your child's fear trigger, what kind of thoughts are they having about anxiety? Germs are a common trigger for anxiety. The pandemic may have heightened your child's response if they're already predisposed to worrying about germs. This makes it more challenging as you have to unravel truth from myth, but it's not an insurmountable problem. Not all children can identify their thoughts. In those cases, they may need your help to unpack their thoughts a little bit. When we know what your child's brain is saying, we can start talking back to it. If the worry brain is saying, I'm going to catch the virus and I'm going to die, you could say, your worry brain is telling you that, but actually we're doing everything to keep you safe, and it's very rare for children in Ottawa to catch the virus. Let's get some new hand soap to keep you extra safe. Giving children some power to act on their fears can be very helpful. This is where you might start seeing some common thinking traps like all or nothing thinking or catastrophizing. You may have noticed that your child relies on you quite a bit for reassurance. This is very common for anxious children. As their worry brain is telling them that they're unsafe, they rely on you to let them know that they're safe. Remember, back to the toddler stage, your child would fall down and then look at your face to see if you're showing worry or calm. Your child would need you to assess that everything is okay. Well, children with anxiety will do that for a longer time, past the time where their peers start to have an inner sense of gauging safety. You may also notice that your child may make multiple requests for reassurance, but yet not feel reassured by your response. That's because anxiety is not a logic problem. Despite your reassurance, their brain is still sending a danger response. This is why, although reassurance is a gentle, loving thing to do as a parent, it doesn't always help children with anxiety, and unfortunately, it may actually feed into their fear trigger. For instance, many parents may have noticed increases in reassurance seeking after last year's tornado. Worries will also often show up at bedtime. This is common. This is when the mind is still without the normal distractions of the day. And so you might actually see an increase in worries coming up when you're tucking your child into bed. Like we mentioned earlier, there's an intensity and a pervasiveness to mental illness. Here are some indicators related to anxiety. This is where you might have a child say, I'm going to fail grade 6 because they're struggling with one particular math problem. You might also be seeing some pervasive negative self-talk like, I'm stupid, I'm the worst. You may be seeing a lot more time spent on worries than you've noticed in other children. And these worries might have a broad impact across your child's day, like during school and at sleep time. Often, the distinguishing marker between typical anxiety and an anxiety disorder is the impact on the daily life. For instance, if your child is really wanting to go to a sleepover, but his worry about saying the wrong thing is preventing her from going, then there might be a cause for concern. Are you unable to take a family trip due to your child's worry with having to use an unfamiliar washroom? Is your child losing sleep, contemplating a playdate the next day? These can be some of the tangible ways that parents know that there is a concern. Some children have very specific triggers like germs or social activities, but for some children, anxiety may reach across multiple domains like eating, hygiene, school, and friendships. Dr. Brubrick, a clinical psychologist at the Childmind Institute, discusses some themes around how the pandemic has affected kids that are anxious. The current pandemic may exacerbate your child's anxiety. Here are a few things to think about for anxious children. For more tips, you can watch our first webinar, which explores the impact of the pandemic on children and what you can do to create safety in their lives. So the goal with anxiety is not treating the fear, but bringing the child to the point where they feel they can cope with the fear. There's a lot of uncertainty with the current pandemic. That fear is real. However, supporting your child in coping with their fear is very possible. You may be seeing increases in symptoms of anxiety with your child. Remember the continuum? Stress may shift your child along the continuum towards mental illness. Filter the information for your children and pass along valid local information. It doesn't help to read articles about the US right now. Ottawa Public Health is doing a wonderful job of sharing accurate and timely information. Make sure that the information is age appropriate. Co-regulation is so important. We discussed it in the first and second webinar. If you can model calm, that will go a long way to convince your child that the world is calm and safe. If that's challenging for you, you may need to review your own coping strategies, as discussed in the first webinar. Another common reason for parents to seek mental health support is depression. Sadness is an understandable response when you're stressed, or if you've experienced a loss, it's normal to feel sad. In the first webinar, we discussed grief briefly. If you've lost a loved one, if you've lost a job due to the pandemic, or someone you care about is sick, these feelings are all very common. Where there might be a concern is where the emotional response seems out of proportion with the loss. Grievers may feel this way for a year or more after losing a loved one. However, if your child has an event canceled due to the pandemic, like a hockey tournament, and a month later she still refuses to come out of her room and cries frequently, you may need professional support. 1 in 5 children will experience depression by the time they turn 18 years of age. Here are some common symptoms of depression: sadness, hopelessness, and low positive emotions. Your child may have some of these, but not necessarily all of them. Note that anger and irritability can be part of depression. Your child may seem really impatient and easily frustrated. This can also be a depressive symptom. Although generally the main emotion is sadness or apathy, it's not always the case. Thinking about physical symptoms, it can be confusing when we say symptoms may include sleeping more or sleeping less, losing weight or gaining weight. Again, thinking about what's typical for your child. If your normally energetic child is struggling to get out of bed, that might be a cause for concern. But if your child has always been a big sleeper and nothing has changed, then you might not need to worry. Overall, physically, your child may get a sense of everything feeling more difficult or taking more effort. You may have started to notice some common symptoms between anxiety and depression. One of the emotions that can be present in both is worry, and one of the behavioral symptoms can be avoidance, which are common symptoms of anxiety as well. In fact, it is common for people with anxiety to experience depression and vice versa. Studies vary, but the rates can be as high as 80% of the people who may experience both in their lifetime. So 80% of people will experience depression at some point in their lifetime and vice versa. As we said at the beginning, both anxiety and depression are your child's way of saying they're not coping. Often one of the first indicators of depression is in the child's changed perspective on life. When they're talking to you, is their perspective very negative and pessimistic? Are you hearing a lack of optimism in their thoughts? And especially when they're talking about the future? This can give you insight into what's going on, especially for children who don't easily share their feelings. As you may have noticed, one of the symptoms of depression can be what we call suicidal ideation. This means having thoughts of suicide. Although we don't like to think about it, suicidal thoughts in children are actually common. Although suicidal thoughts are common in times of overwhelm, suicidal acts are not as common, though they do happen. Suicidal behavior can start as early as 5 years of age, though it's most likely to appear for the first time around age 8 or 9. The intent of this is not to scare you. We often see a freeze response in parents when faced with the unconscionable thought of having their child say, "I wish I was dead." We want you to know it's okay and we can help. Suicidal ideation often means, "I'm overwhelmed. I don't know how to solve this on my own." Some parents will say, "This is attention seeking," and I always respond, "Suicide should get attention." If a child shares thoughts of suicide, you should give them your full attention. This warrants a big response. By talking to your child about suicide, you're showing them that they can come to you should the thoughts come back. Again, suicidal ideation doesn't necessarily mean that your child wants to die, but I strongly recommend that you seek professional support to make that determination. No parent should feel like they need to determine the level of risk and danger in their child. You need an objective professional. So who can make this assessment? If you feel that your child is in imminent danger, this means that you don't feel like you can leave them alone safely. Call 911 or bring them to your local emergency room. If you're not sure though, the crisis line professionals are available to help you make that determination. They are available 24/7 by phone, and they will advise you on next steps. This service is for guardians and or children age 18 years and under. You can call with your child or without your child if you want to get their recommendations. If you happen to catch this webinar and you don't happen to live in Eastern Ontario, call 311 and your city services can let you know what the number is for your local crisis line, or you can go to connectsontario.ca. We invite you to come to our walk-in clinic if you're concerned about suicide. Our child and family therapist can assess the level of risk present and work with you to create a safety plan. For children 12 and over, they can access the walk-in clinic at Youth Services Bureau. Now the good news. Anxiety and depression are highly treatable. As we mentioned earlier, recovery is entirely within reach for individuals with mental illness. What does recovery mean for your child? Although we know a lot about what helps children with mental illness, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Today we'll go through a brief overview of what to start thinking about when thinking about recovery. This is simply an introduction, things you can start working on while you might be waiting for an appointment with a professional. When thinking about your child, try to imagine where they are currently situated. The graph can help you determine where your child is on the continuum. On one end, we have being okay. This doesn't mean 100% happiness. That's not realistic for anybody. It means that your child feels that they can cope with the challenges presented to them. They look forward to things and participate in family life. For some of you, your child is starting to show signs of not being well. These are the indicators we mentioned. Maybe you're noticing shifts in their thoughts, their behaviors, or their emotion. This is a place where you want to start doing more of what helps. If you're fortunate enough to know what helps your child, then this is where you prioritize those activities. If you have no idea what helps your child, shortly we'll have a few ideas to get you started. And at the opposite end of the continuum, we have your child not coping at all. They're easily overwhelmed by any demands, and they are not actively participating in the life around them. Children will generally show us that they're starting to not be okay if we're paying attention. I invite you to think about your child's red flags. What might be some of the cues that your child is not doing well? Are there some early warning signs? Is your child turning down invitations? Is your child normally an open book and now they give you one-word answers? Parents often know when their children are starting to not be okay, but it can help to look for tangible indicators. Although mental health recovery is not a simple process, through trial and error, you would eventually arrive at a list of what makes things harder and what makes things better for your child. Through observation and conversations with your child, you might already have a sense of what makes things harder. This is what we call triggers and stressors. One way to think about this is to ask yourself, what would need to happen to guarantee that my child has a bad day? And that usually are your triggers. Understanding what are the things that make it more stressful will help you know when it's time to kick up the coping strategies. If you know what those are, you can proactively make sure to plan some coping activities throughout the week to help balance things out. Sensory triggers can include a lot of shouting, chaos in the environment. This would apply at school as well. Some kids are quite adaptable to different settings, and some kids feel really stressed out if it's too loud, too bright, or too cluttered, etc. So you're pretty sure that your child's not okay. So how can you help? You might have made an appointment with your family doctor. You may explore some medical option. There's no shame in that. We would never shame a diabetic for taking insulin. It's the same with mental illness. Some children may need medication to function. That's something you can explore with your family doctor or psychiatrist. Connection is always the best place to start. As you can see from the quote from Besser Vanderkop, trauma expert, caregivers matter quite a bit. Can you increase the one-on-one time with your child? I know we're all stretched thin, so think quality, not quantity. If you invest in connection, then you may save time in the long run by proactively making deposit in your child's emotional bank account. Also, it doesn't have to mean parents or caregivers. It relates to a caring adult. Is there a grandparent that can spare some time for one-on-one activity? Think about who's part of your team. Do you have a great respite worker or trustworthy babysitter? Is there a hockey coach who totally gets it? A pastor with great patience? Think about who's part of your team when things aren't going well for your child. So some of us grew up in families where maybe our own caregivers didn't spend a lot of time with us. You might not know what it means to be with your child. In this short video that was created in collaboration with Algonquin Media students, we show some examples of what empathy could look like. It's not too complicated. Be in your child's present, follow their lead, reflect back what they are doing or saying.
Empathy, the action of understanding, being aware of, being sensitive to, and empathy, the action of understanding, being aware of, being sensitive to, and vicariously experiencing the feelings, thoughts, and experience of another. Being with.
When I know that you care about my feelings and are willing to join me in how they feel to me, I no longer feel alone or overwhelmed by what seems so difficult in the moment.
Being curious.
I don't like school. I don't want to go.
I can see that you're upset. You seem to be having a tough time at school lately. I'm just wondering what's going on.
It helps when you stop what you're doing and then you listen and notice what I'm going through. You can use simple language to show me that you understand what I'm feeling. Don't try to fix my problem, just try to understand it.
Providing reassurance.
You're really mad at your sister, huh? You're not in trouble. I just want to understand. I know there must be an important reason this is happening. Can you tell me more?
When you reassure me and spend time with me when I'm having a hard time, it helps me to stay calm and be able to talk to you.
Being with. Being curious. Providing reassurance.
People who participate in the solution to problems don't seem to find themselves as depressed about those problems as do people standing on the sidelines doing nothing. Hope is born of participation in hopeful solutions. This is a quote by Marianne Williamson. So once you've connected with your child, try to get a sense of what's going on for them. By being there without judgment, you can create a safe space for your child to share their concerns. You might not be able to address all of their concerns, but by showing them that they're not alone, you're giving them hope. Remember the idea of co-regulation that we presented in webinar 1 and 2. Being a calm presence, you're already doing a lot to help calm your child and bring them to a state where they can talk to you. You're setting the stage to encourage them to come to you no matter what problems they are facing. Coping strategies are simple but individualized. It may take some time to find out what's part of your child's toolbox. Not everything works for everyone, just like your self-care looks different than your partner's self-care. You may have to try a few things and see what works best. Some strategies may work at the beginning of the continuum when your child is starting to not be okay, but other strategies may be needed when your child is unable to cope. For instance, maybe art and going for a walk in the forest helps when there's a little stress, but talking to a therapist or a weekend with a favorite relative is the best thing when they're really not coping. The more stress you have, the more you have to pepper in strategies that help you alleviate that stress. This list includes evidence-based strategies for coping. If you would like more ideas, you can search online or Pinterest for coping strategies, and there'll be a ton of suggestions. It's possible that you don't yet know what your child's coping strategies include. That's okay. Start exploring and just notice what makes things better, what makes stress smaller. Some kids are more complicated. You may need support in unraveling some of these threads and understanding their triggers. We hope that today you have some ideas to get started, but as always, if you need more help, please reach out to us. As we wrap up, we want to bring your attention to a relatively new service here in Ottawa. This service is called Counseling Connect. It can be accessed at counselingconnect.org. Counseling Connect provides free access to same-day or next-day phone or video counseling session. This service is for children, youth, adults, and families in Ottawa and the surrounding area. Families can actually access our services through Counseling Connect. There's no waiting list and no cost. And remember, you can also access supports through our weekly walking clinic. You can also reach us directly at 613-723-1623 extension 232 to find out more about us or any of our programs. In closing, as an agency, Crossroads is fundraising for the very first time to ensure that we can meet the increased demand for our services. If you're able to, consider donating. Every dollar counts and a tax receipt will be provided. Our goal is to fundraise $80,000 by the end of September, which will allow us to support 600 additional children and families to get them the help they need when they need it the most. You can go to canadahelps.org or visit our website and click on the Support Us tab at the top. All donation dollars go directly to supporting children's mental health in Ottawa. The interconnectedness of the world made us all vulnerable to this infection, but it's the same interconnectedness that will help us heal and recover. We're all in this together. We hope that you've enjoyed our 3 webinars. Thank you so much for listening. Have a good day.